many people don't really understand what they are. And so my goal in doing mergers, acquisitions, alliances is so that when you read about them, you should know what to look for and how to kind of think about these things. But these charts here, right? They sort of show that merger and acquisition activity occurs in waves, and so these are years. Right, the year 1895, the Industrial Revolution, and these are the number and the value of acquisition deals in which at least one side of the deal was a U.S. company. Right, and so the Industrial Revolution comes around, and this is before the Sherman antitrust laws come about. But like all of the Industrial Revolution, you want like big economies of scale, right? So the Industrial Revolution gives you the scale, and the railroad gives you the ability to transport across distances, and the telegraph gives you the ability to coordinate across distances, right? So then all of these things kind of come together at the same time to create this kind of environment for this consolidation and searching for monopoly power. And so this wave comes around, and the Sherman antitrust law kills the wave, right? And then you sort of have like the Roaring 20s, and it takes some time to recover. Roaring 20s come around, and this wave gets killed by the Great Depression, right? And I could go through all of these things and kind of go through it, but the idea is that economic activity helps create the waves, and financial conditions in the economy help create the waves, and the lack of it kill the waves, right? So even if I went here, you would see the dot-com bubble burst, right? Then the recovery, and then you've got the 2008 crisis, all right? So you sort of see that kind of stuff happen. It turns out that, mergers and acquisitions don't turn out well very much at all. And so especially for the acquiring firm, the returns are close to zero. But for the target firm, like if you're the shareholder of a company being acquired, that's a good thing. And usually people in this class kind of don't understand that at first. But the target company, right? If their shares are trading at $35 a share, and we want to acquire that company, well, we need to pay a premium to get them to sell. Right? Why would they sell if not for that? So the target firm, right, there's above average returns, the research shows. And the acquiring firm is about zero. And then you sort of see if they're interviewed, what are the failure rates and success rates. So it begs the question, like, why do acquirers acquire? And their story is that
are you watching a video?
Right? An acquisition is a rare event, right? And it's hard for us to be good at rare events. But it turns out some companies do it pretty consistently, and they do it pretty consistently well, and they've learned to do it so that it becomes a skill. And so what we try to do here is kind of learn what is it that they do well, and why is it, is there anything that we can learn from that? So I think one of the things to kind of look at here are, why do firms acquire? These are reasons that companies acquire. And then these are reasons that companies have trouble with acquiring. All right? And so one thing I do want to point out, remember I talked about that inverse U-shape between level of diversification and performance, right? Inverse U-shape. So reasons that firms acquire is to increase diversification, reshape the firm's competitive scope. Like that brings you up the left side of that inverse U. And the problems part of it is too much diversification, right? That brings you down the other side of it, right? So that helps explain that inverse U shape. All right. this is a statement of the obvious, but it sort of bears stating, is that, like, what price should you pay to acquire a company? Right? So what price should you pay? And so one of the things that we think is that one of the reasons that acquisitions go bad is that some companies and some managers think they're so good, like managerial hubris, that they can turn this company around or make it work, that they'll overpay for it. So, so the statement of the obvious is, if the share price is trading at $35 a share, and you think you can create $5 per share in value, what's the most that you should pay? Right? The most you should pay is probably like $39.99. But, there's all kinds of transaction costs in there, right? So it's probably going to be something less than that, right? And what's the least you'll be able to pay, right? In theory, $35 and a penny should get the target company to sell, but you probably have to pay something more than that, some other premium to get them to sell, right? So you're trying to get as close to that $35 and a penny as you can, but you definitely don't want to overpay. Okay, everybody get it? Right, and these are some steps for trying to make that be more successful than not. All right. Okay, alliances have the same problem. So many people think alliances don't have the same problems that acquisitions have. And the difference between an alliance and an acquisition, for an alliance, this is the first time you are able to create and capture value with somebody else's resources. Right? So let me repeat that. You're able to create and capture value with somebody else's resources. So let's say I partner with Marilyn, right? Marilyn's got the brains, like she's got like something going, right? But she needs financing, right? So we can kind of partner together, right, to come to some conclusion, right? And we're going to split something, but it's not all mine, it's not all hers, all right? And there's all different kinds of alliances, right? So it can be a handshake, right? It could be a contract, and like sort of the further you get down here, it could be like a joint venture. All right, so you're sort of setting up another entity. All right, and it turns out that alliances have the same kind of failure problems that that acquisitions do. But sometimes alliances, if an alliance ends, it doesn't necessarily mean that it was a failure. It may be like that it was only intended to, we come together for 5 years and then we end. Sometimes an alliance is like a stepping stone to an acquisition, right? So we sort of try it out. It's a little bit of dating, right? And then an acquisition is we kind of, do the deal. And so I think this is sort of, right, like understanding what makes alliances more successful, what attributes do, is when we're really trying to solve problems, something that I can't do by myself, right, because I need Marilyn, so we're going to combine our resources to create value. You know what, I trust Marilyn, and she trusts me. Like she's got all the knowledge, right, so she trusts me that I'm not going to run away with something like once she tells it to me. And so we've talked so far in this class about competitive advantage. That's like business level, competing against each other. There's a corporate advantage, so the diversification piece, right? And this is like this relational, collaborative, cooperative advantage, right? Those all kind of mean the same thing. And so this is my my very fancy slides that try to help explain the differences of what's happening. And out in canvas, right? This thing here, this spreadsheet here, is a companion Excel spreadsheet that goes along with these animations, right? So we'll go through the animations here. So what do you call it if firm A buys less than 50% of B? So less than 50% of B, right? It's an equity strategic alliance. So equity, when I have equity in something, like that means I have ownership of it. Like people will talk about how much equity they have in their house, right? So I may have purchased the house for $300,000 and I took out a $250,000 loan. So I only have $50,000 in equity, in ownership of that house. The bank has the rest, right? So equity is about ownership. Exactly 50%, you don't really have a name for this, like it's sort of a stepping stone to something else. Firm A buys more than 50% of B, that's a partial acquisition. So what's the difference between 49% and 51%, right? 49% and 51%. It's 2%, but it's a huge 2% because it makes all the difference in decision making, who's got power, who's got authority, right? So that's a big deal, all right? So that 2%. And then A buys 100% of B, right? So B ceases to exist. So you saw the fancy thing, it goes away, right? So now we've got A buys less than 50% of B, B buys less than 50% of A. This is also a equity strategic alliance, but sometimes this is called cross-shareholding. So you see this kind of arrangement a lot in Japan, like a lot of the car assembly and suppliers, right? So that's to help align incentives of really complex negotiations, right? If I own a certain percent of Brandon, right, then I want Brandon to be successful, and I'm going to do things so that Brandon is successful and profitable because I'm going to get part of that profit, right? So that without a big complex contract, I'm able to kind of make that work. All right. So A and B share resources to create C, right? So that's a joint venture. So we've got a new entity that's created. A and B merge and become C. So they go away, right? So that's called a merger. And this is where I think a lot of the terminology gets muddy. So sometimes they call it a statutory consolidation. So this was like the Daimler Chrysler deal. So at one point in time, Daimler, like the company that makes Mercedes, merged with Chrysler, right? And so the shareholders of each company surrender their shares, and then they're issued shares in the combined company. And some, I actually have a colleague who is like so adamant about nobody calling it a merger, because he says there's no such thing as a merger because there's always one side of the deal that has more power than the other side. All right. And so then the last one is A buys 100% of B, and these are two really big companies, or two equally sized companies, right? B goes away, and that should be an acquisition like we talked about before, but sometimes they call it a statutory merger so that B doesn't feel bad. Right? So, so you got merger here. So to me, the things that, like, regardless of what they call it, the things that you need to think about are percent ownership. Is a new entity created? Does one cease to exist? Who's got decision-making power? Who's got authority? Right? Those kinds of things. Right? I think those are more telling than whatever you call it. All right? But it's really about, like, how are you aligning incentives? All right. You should know the idea of, like, what's a horizontal alliance or a horizontal merger, or a vertical alliance or a vertical merger. So these are the short story is horizontal means if, right, so this is the value chain of one company, this is the value chain of another. So if it's the same part of the value chain, right, outbound logistics here and outbound logistics here, then it's horizontal. If it's different parts of the value chain, right, so if it's operations here with marketing and sales here, right, that's a vertical alliance or a vertical acquisition, like whatever that deal is. But if it's different parts of the value chain, then it would be vertical. All right. Forward integration is going this way, right? So like essentially this is the flow of things, right? So forward integration means going that way. Backward integration means going that way. Right? So forward and backward are just little subsets of vertical. Right? So just from a terminology standpoint. All right, what else do we have? Right, I think sort of understanding the benefits, right, the pros and cons of alliances, and I don't know if you can see this, right, understanding the pros and cons of these things. I think, you know, make sure you go through that and understand them. And I think like the Lincoln Electric team did a bit of that today. And the last one is to kind of think about this chart. So this is like one summary sheet of the when to ally, when to acquire reading. And so understanding these 5 things here, right? So I'll just kind of go through them quickly. And then the different organizational outcomes, right? And so the idea of that article was that, you know, if you have capabilities in alliance, you tend to see every opportunity as an alliance opportunity. And if you have capabilities in acquisitions, you see every opportunity as an acquisition opportunity. But they're all different, right? Every deal is a little bit different, and you sort of have to look at the qualities of the deal and then kind of make a decision based on that. So one of the qualities is this resource is soft to hard. So a hard resource is like plant and equipment. It's machines, stuff that can't walk away, right? Soft is people, right? And so a deal in which you have a lot of people content relative to plant and equipment, right? That would make the ratio high, and that would suggest an alliance would be the way to go, because you don't want to pay a premium for all of these people who could then just walk out the door, right? So you're going to try to work through an alliance to get that relationship to work. All right? Any questions on that? Resource redundancy, right? Redundant resources. Like, so redundant means like sort of the same. So if there's a deal where I have a plant and Matt has a plant, or I have an engineering division and his has an engineering division, what we're going to want to do is do the deal through an acquisition, right? Because we have a lot of overlap. And so if we don't do it through an acquisition, you know, Matt's going to fight for his people. I'm going to fight for my people, right? And when you have redundant resources, a lot of times you're going to hear sort of like these code words about, right, like this resource redundancy is sort of like code for layoffs or plant shutdowns, right? So once I have, like, you're going to want to, you'll see this when industries consolidate, right? Is that you're going to, like, one's going to acquire another, and then they're going to shut down the more inefficient operations and then grow the more efficient ones. All right? And so the idea for when there's more redundancy is that you're going to do that deal through an acquisition so that you can control what that outcome is. All right? Still with me? Okay. Market uncertainty. So it's uncertainty about an outcome. So sometimes when there's a new technology, and Marilyn's got a technology, and Jonathan's got a technology, Elizabeth's got it, right? Everybody's got their own little version of it. We're not sure which one's going to be the winner, which one's going to be the dominant design in the end. And so what we might do is kind of like this options-based thing. And so I might try to buy like 2% of Jonathan and 2% of Marilyn and 2% of Elizabeth, right? And then I kind of have my toes in each one of them, and I have a little bit of knowledge of each one of them. And as it turns out, Marilyn's isn't working or Jonathan's isn't working, right? I might be able to exit out of that, or I may be able to see Elizabeth's is doing better. I might be able to increase my stake of that. But because I'm not so sure, right, this kind of lets me get my toes in a few places and avoid an all-in risk that I might lose. Level of competition, right? So this is about level of competition for the target company, right? So Alexis has like something going on, right? We all know it. We don't know exactly what it is, but she's got it going on, and everybody wants to acquire her, right? Everybody wants her. And so the thing that you want to do is get there first and lock her up, right? So you want to acquire her, get her into the fold, and then you have control over what it is that's going on. So this is level of competition over that target company. Right? Shared resources. This is, so you sort of have to work your way through each one of these, right? So, so in this example, it would be, I have a plant, Archie has a plant, Brandon has a plant, and I've got to make, at the end of the day, I have to produce 500 widgets. Archie's got to do 300, and Brandon's got to do 200. Right? We could write a contract, and that's all we need to do, right? You need to produce that, and that's it, right? But let's say that each of us still have our plants, but I am the first part of the process, right? And then when I'm done doing my bit to this product, I have to pass it to Archie, and when he's done with his bit, he has to pass it to Brandon, right? So if I blow it in the beginning, I'm really like, those guys are going to suffer because of it. And so, so we may have an equity alliance to kind of align the incentives so that, they're going to help me do my bit and make sure that I'm doing things well, and I want them to be successful. So we sort of align the incentives with this equity alliance. All right. This last one, reciprocal. It may be like sometimes tasks are so complicated, right? We've got to like get together, try something, we talk about it, and then we kind of go and try it, and then we got to come back and talk about it again, and like I do my part, pass to you, you pass it back to me, and we're like, there's all this back and forth. There's a lot of coordination costs that are involved in all of that. And so when you see that sort of thing happening and it's really complex, then it's the coordination costs are too high, so that you're going to want to bring all of that into the company, bring it into the fold, and manage it that way. And so what I have highlighted here are kind of all the high settings of these to kind of say, what does it point to? And so what you'll see is that it's never that everything all neatly points to equity alliance, or everything all neatly points to acquisition. So you sort of have to look at what's going on with these qualities here and determine which are the really important ones, and kind of make your decision that way, right? So judgment comes in there. Okay. Any questions on that? Let's see. What haven't I covered? There's a little bit on organizational integrity. All right, there was the Dan Ariely video.